Hello everyone. I got a few comments on the videos I posted recently of me singing, saying something along the lines of, I love that you sing in your own accent, which is something I've seen on a lot of other videos of musicians I like, and of friends, and of loads of people over the years, even down to like One Direction. And the question that always comes up is, why do British people sing in American accents? And I think that's a really interesting thing to discuss, especially coming from the point of view of someone who did used to sing in kind of an American accent, and has since kind of adapted my singing style and landed back in my own voice. Now obviously, anything that's true for me in this sense is not necessarily universally true, but there are some explanations and conclusions I've come to about why I fell into what I consider to be the trap of accidentally doing this, and why it was important for me to unlearn that tendency. But that does not mean that for everyone it's like a bad habit that they should try not to do. Everybody's different. It's all fine. We're all okay. Now, quick disclaimer, throughout this, I am going to be referring to a British accent and an American accent, even though obviously there are many, many variations in both of those countries, particularly in the UK, I think. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to be generalising. And because in Scotland, you got your Lauren Mayberry from Churches, you got your Proclaimers, who all sing in a pretty clear Scottish accent, but you've also got your Emily Sandés and Lewis Capaldi's, so it all applies. First of all, clearly, it does really depend on style and genre, right? Like random examples from various eras, you got your Tom Joneses. Most Americans I've asked think he's American, when he is in fact Welsh. Your Cliff Richardses, not a British sounding man, is he? You got Freddie Mercury, you got Leona Lewis, both who happen to actually be quite hit and miss, but usually accused of sounding American. But then you've also got Philip Oakey, Jarvis Cocker, both of Oasis, all two members, Alex Turner, etc, etc. All vastly different styles with vastly different vocal patterns to fit their genre. But what I see mostly discussed is like normal pop music. Normal. There's two major reasons that I think British artists sound American sometimes, and only one of them applies to me. So reason number one, the general consensus for why this happens is just the very obvious reason that it's how you sing good, and it comes down to linguistics and the science of singing. One of the ways that an accent is mostly identified is the vowels, the open letters. Like how I know someone's English when they say Wales. Wales. They say Wales as one syllable, when it's like minimum 1.5. 2 if it's wearing heels. And when you sing, in order to get the best sound quality coming out of your throat, you need an open vowel. And this is universal. This isn't just American accents. Like basically, without being rude, it's just how to sing the best. Okay? And don't get me wrong, some of the greatest singers in history, some of my favourite artists, had no vocal training, could be pitchy, and had an unconventional and inconsistent tone. And a lot of the time, that's what makes their singing so good. It can feel more like they're singing from the heart. You don't have to have training to express yourself through song. You can sing as you are. It's all beautiful. But for the purposes of this, what I mean is the type of singing that people aim for to have a lot of power and consistency. That gives people the most objective control over their body and their sound, like using the human voice as an instrument. Vocal coaches will tell people to adapt the vowel that they're singing to allow for the best airflow. You can get a much more controlled tone from open vowels than closed ones. And this is something that professional singers will do naturally. So for example, E, like in the word me, you know the word me, is a very closed vowel, right? Your face muscles are tight, you can't push a lot of air out. So the word me in song quite often gets adapted to may, because it's a nice open vowel, nice good airflow. May. So if you're singing like me, me, may. Sure. Also a common one that flags up in my head when I'm listening to British people sing is the word I. In my accent, for example, there's quite a lot going on when I say the word I. It's like a really quick succession of R and E. I. So you're starting off with an open vowel that you can get a lot of force behind, but then pulling it back into like an E sound, which is a closed vowel, which would make the word lose power and kind of trail off at the end. So a common way to sing that is instead to sing it like you and I. You and I. That kind of thing. It's science. You can feel the improvement in your tone by doing that. And more importantly, for the argument that it's about objective flow, is that American singers are doing that too. Like a lot of American accents would say I in the same way that I do. There's no distinction. It's not like, so it's not like British people say I and then change it to ah, because there's plenty of American accents where you say I, right? There are very few accents in the US that would pronounce the word me as may, right? Maybe like a southern accent, like Miley Cyrus, she doesn't talk like this, does she? But there are loads of American artists saying those words in the exact same way. So this isn't about British people changing to a more neutral American accent in this instance. It's about both American and British singers changing to a neutral accent, which best facilitates their voice. It's just that because one of them is already closer to the phonetic sounds of this clear and open singing technique, we don't really notice it as much. And then it's also the rhythm and pattern of speaking that adds to an accent. And if someone's communicating via lyrics, the stress on certain words, the elongation of certain words to fit the desired rhythm and emotion is tailored. And there's an obvious difference in a lot of American pronunciations of words, so anything that removes that distinction is going to make it sound like the accent has changed entirely. An American might say like controversy, right? Controversy. Whereas a lot of British people say controversy or adult, right? Like, they would say adult and we would say adult. And obviously singers are never singing how they would speak in their natural accent. Otherwise it would sound like,
lights will guide you home and ignite your bones.
No, what are you doing?
So this is another explanation that supports the argument that people aren't changing their accents when they sing. They're just pronouncing things in a way that facilitates singing. British people might lose their accents in song because accents are also identified by intonation and stress. And British English is quite spiky. You know what I mean though, right? Like it's spiky. It's just like a bunch of vowels smushed between really fast consonants. Like beatboxing. British accents are really shit beatboxing. Thank you. And so the stress that we put on consonants, or the lack of stress that we put on consonants in like a glottal stop, which is that thing that I just did, in order to pronounce the name of it, where you just stop expelling air and then start again. It's why people quite often don't know what I'm asking for when I ask for a water or a butter. This doesn't matter. Obviously, if you're singing and you're trying to project a strong sound, stopping that sound in the middle and then resuming, it's not going to work.
Doesn't matter.
As with implosive consonants like G, B, D, C, love that band, the sound is produced by a small burst of air. And to do that in a controlled way, you can't be mid-note. Whereas in American accents, these are quite often softer, where a British person would say, I don't know. An American might say like, I don't know. There's like, I'm sorry. Sorry I'm subjecting you to this regularly, but we're just going to deal with it. Particularly if you were singing those words like, I don't know, versus, I don't know. I just think it's easier, you know? In American accents, those consonants are less invasive to the airflow, so it's a more continuous sound. So, for example, a couple of easy ones. Ellie Goulding doesn't sound as British when she sings, but I think that is exactly what's happening here. To me, she still clearly sounds British, she's just singing. So all the effects that I've talked about are just slightly altering how her voice comes across. Ed Sheeran, another example of this. To me, when I hear Ed Sheeran sing, he's very clearly British, but I've seen a lot of people accuse him of having an American accent when he sings. There is the occasional like curling of the tongue on an R sound, like an R, at words like heart, but that can be explained by the harshness of a T not fitting where you kind of want that word to trail off. Like some people would say heart, but I would say heart. Ha, ha. But you can't just sing heart because that would sound ridiculous. And if you said heart, the T is such a like punctuating point at the end that it's quite sharp. You know, spiky, sharp British people. It would sound pretty weird if you sang baby my heart. It's just really heart. So I think sometimes in situations like that, it's not an American R sound. It's just the only option to trail off the word without having a hard stop on the T. Baby my heart. They just sort of go, hi, to try and just swoop it on, hi, just to try and just get that note away. I'm done with that one. Finished. Don't want that. But with that, he still clearly sounds British. Which brings us to answer number one of why do British people sound American when they sing? They don't. They're just opening up their pronunciation to facilitate tone. The other extreme of this is obviously that those sharp consonants of a British accent can work really well stylistically. You got Lily Allen, Kate Nash, both Marina and the Diamonds, Hannah Reid off of London Grammar, Matty Healy from the 1975, and of course, British rap is beautifully punctuated by the harshness of British accents. American accents with the softer consonants can sound almost like sloppy, like Ocean Wisdom, right? That final verse in Eye Contact is beautifully articulated at impossible speed in his British accent. But all that aside, ignore all of that. Reason number two, which is the one that applies to me, is that we consume so much American media. Most of the telly that we watch throughout childhood is American. The British and American charts are often like interchangeable. We listen to so much American music. And I think we're just conditioned to believe that that version of singing that we're so accustomed to hearing is just how you sing. My earliest memories of evidence of this affliction in my life was, I was about 7 or 8, and me and my friend Bethan were walking home from school together. We, well, maybe mainly me, but we were singing S Club 7, and I was singing in a voice that I believed at the time to just be how you sing. Really nasally, like Gabriela Montez, but with less skill, and an American accent. And my mate Bethan was like, why do you sing in that voice? And I was like, this is just singing good. Maybe you've heard of it. You don't know what you're talking about. Or something to that effect, because I was a little twat. But the most interesting thing to me about that case was that I was just emulating the voices of the music I was listening to, which at the time was primarily just a random assortment of songs from Now That's What I Call Music, and S Club 7, who also sing in American accents, and also are British. I think I was just imitating all of the singers that I'd heard, and the majority of charts music that I was exposed to was American. So when I sung, an American accent came out, and it didn't even feel like I was putting one on. I just felt like I was singing, right? especially because all the songs that I would try to learn, to play along with on my guitar, or just sing along with, were by American bands. And that went on for years, singing songs again and again in a voice that I believed to just be my singing voice. And because of the massive range in the prevalence of a British accent in loads of different genres, the biggest contributing factor is probably just the type of music you listen to, which is something that some British artists have pointed out themselves.
Our inspiration tend to be American, from Whitney to Mariah. We're more from like the punky world. Like, growing up, I love my soul so much that everything that I've ever done, I've tried to like sound familiar with.
When we grow up, we listen to music. What do we listen to? We listen to Michael Jackson, we listen to Whitney Houston, Stevie Wonder. They're all American. When we start to sing, that's the only way we know how to do it. On the reverse side, American bands, you know, the indie pop bands, they emulate people like Oasis, who are British, and that's why they sound British when they sing.
In an old interview with One Direction, they pretty much covered all of these bases. One of them saying that they felt pressure from the label to slightly adapt their accent. One of them saying that it's just the music British people listen to that influences the way they sing. And one of them even saying that he didn't think pop music sounded right in a British accent. Certain words are easier to sing when you round off your L's and R's. Certain songs by American artists, as with all accents, rely on those accents for the rhyme to work. So I would just sing the rhyme correctly. Even in this video, right? Which is hard for me to watch, I won't lie. But I start off in my accent. And then by halfway through the song, I'm in a much more like Americanized accent. Because the sounds I was trying to make at that speed only sounded right and therefore were easier in an American accent. But actually, the fact that my voice when singing didn't sound like my accent was a source of insecurity, especially back then with a really untrained and inconsistent voice. I think I probably wouldn't have minded as much if my voice was good enough, but I was just so worried if I sung in front of people, they'd be like, that's not her accent. And because that meant that they'd both be thinking, 1, she's a bad singer, and 2, why is she sounding American? I was too scared. But there was an added drawback for me, which was the most significant point. When I was singing in an accent that wasn't mine, I sort of felt, even just subconsciously, that I was singing like as a character. Not something I was intentionally putting on, just kind of like the version of you at a job interview, right? It's you, but your mannerisms are different. Your words are different. Your accent's different. And you do that weird kind of semi-laugh thing at everything the interviewer says. And I felt like I wasn't properly connecting to the song. I was singing, but it wasn't me. It was the singing voice. And all the emotions that I was trying to channel through the song just had this block in front of them. It's perfectly okay to sing a song just for the hell of it, right? It's not compulsory to have some deep emotional connection to it. But there were lots of songs that I was singing because I identified with them. But when the lyrics came out of my mouth, I wasn't. And there was one huge breakthrough that I made at this stage. It was a song that I wrote during a phase of about 2 years where I was very, very depressed before I left school. And I wrote a song that was really raw at the time, but it's now reassuringly distant to me emotionally. But when I sung that song, my own voice came out. Still patchy and wobbly and very, very sad, but it was me. And through that, I realised that what I'd been doing, and also I just want to clarify that just because this is true for me doesn't mean it's true for everyone else. And even if it was, it's fucking singing, it's joy. People can do whatever they like. But for me, what I'd been doing is kind of hiding behind that character version of myself as a singer. It wasn't me singing, those weren't my words, and that wasn't my soul, to protect myself from the vulnerability of singing. So I started to try and train myself not to do that. And it opened up this space to really connect with what I was singing, to really feel it, to put my emotions on the line when translating something to song. Suddenly I wasn't hiding behind anything anymore. I was really singing. And when that happened, all the flaws in my voice didn't really matter because it felt real and it felt authentic. And that is something that stayed with me ever since. There will be some moments and some songs that don't sound quite right in many ways, but the bond that I can have with songs that I sing now is so much better. And although I don't think this is the case for everyone, if this is something that makes sense to you and you think that maybe your singing accent developed in quite an artificial way as well, if it feels in any way strange, I really, really can't recommend enough that you take a step back and assess if it's for the same reasons as it was for me. Because if so, you might be missing out. I'm really interested to hear if anyone has experiences that relate to this or oppose it. And I'm really interested to hear from people who kind of found the opposite thing. Like maybe you felt that your natural accent didn't allow you to sing as authentically as when you took on a more neutral one. Especially if you're someone that has an objectively better voice than me. And you really, really have to open it up to get full power, which is something that I assume I do sometimes. Like I can feel myself doing that. It just doesn't always change the accent. I don't know. And if anyone far more qualified than me has interesting points about accents and singing, I would love to hear them. Because pretty much all of the 20 articles and videos I watched on this, like my assumption, kind of seem to settle somewhere in the middle. Thank you very much for your company. Enjoy singing. and goodbye.